Alrighty, the show is gonna get started in 3, 2, 1.
Hi friends, I am Kasey, and I assume you read the title. This is what you watched last week. We are just talking about what we watched last week, whether it be fiction or non-fiction, movies or television, YouTube, theater. We kind of make our own rules here. But that doesn't mean anything is intended to be any sort of in-depth criticism or review of anything we are discussing, although, you know, there's going to be criticisms and talking about things in there. This is just a series intended to spread a little love for the things we love. And I love stories. So why don't we just jump into what we watched the second week of June? 2023's Sharksploitation. Now, this is a very straightforward documentary on the history of sharks and movies. Not just the movies that everyone looks at as Jaws ripoffs, but the movies that came before, during, and yeah, the movies that definitely came after as well, asking questions regarding why we find the movies so and when the shifts towards the vilification of sharks really began in the motion picture industry. The amount of interviews you get from casts and crew of some of your favorite not Jaws movies, as well as some actual factual shark experts and ocean people, there's a whole lot a person can get out of this production, especially individuals who just enjoy horror movies or movie history or sharks in general. 1963's The Great Escape. Now, this is the true story of 76 escapees from Stalag Luft III, a German prisoner of war camp set during the Second World War, where prisoners built multiple functioning tunnels with ventilations and lighting systems, modified hundreds of linens to work as civilian clothes, and forged enough documents by hand to get as many as 200 people out. In reality, none of this was a fabrication that the movie had to make up to be more exciting for the audience. And outside of making a few American contributors more key players in the motion picture, this is a remarkably accurate story as well, as several of the actors could definitely attest, being ex-POWs themselves. And while the camera work might be a little more static than audiences might expect today, the pacing, the dialogue, and the characters I've always found are more than enough to keep the story engaging. If anything, the movie is very, very, very long. Way longer than I usually like even, but the problem with it this time around, I just can't find 3 dedicated hours to sit and watch it undisturbed because I am constantly engaged throughout and don't want to break up the experience because I had to run out the door. 1980's The Final Countdown. It's the final countdown. Ba-da-da-da. Ba-da-da-da-da. In this feature-length, legally distinct Twilight Zone episode, the entire crew of a 1970s United States aircraft carrier end up traveling back in time to the middle of the Pacific Ocean just hours before the attack on Pearl Harbor, December 7th, 1941, where the named characters debate whether to not intervene and just let Pearl happen so the United States can join World War II, or intervene and force the United States to enter World War II by opening fire on Japan's forces in a United States aircraft carrier. The final countdown is really all about the moral and scientific quandary that is time travel. Do we have a right to change the past for the better? Even if we have a right, can we actually change the past without, preventing ourselves from changing it anyway? Paradoxing the problem into oblivion. If this movie suffers from anything, it's some lackluster editing. When we aren't time traveling through a wormhole, it feels like we are watching a lot of stock footage and static shots of people sitting in a room talking. And when we are time traveling, it is genuinely seizure-inducing and confusing. So, seizure warnings. Mix that with a less than exciting climax, and I can understand why I don't see anybody really talking about this movie, but the core premise and some excellent performances were way more than enough to keep me engaged. 1983's Jaws 3D. Until Spy Kids 3D, this was the highest grossing movie released in 3D. You should think about that while watching a young Dennis Quaid be the protagonist in a SeaWorld so poorly managed, I am surprised we don't see Tilikum. When the shark does show up, everyone thinks it's scary but cool, and they put the shark in the park as an exhibit. Then a bigger shark shows up, and if you care, at 35 feet, this is the biggest shark in the Jaws franchise. And it's significantly less scary. We all know Jaws 3D has some famously bad effects, right? Setting those aside, Fortunately, there is still not a whole lot going on, where the previous movies chose to explore old characters in a pretty much identical story. Here we shift things up by doing nothing with the characters in a vaguely different story. It's just that what is different is that we are in a SeaWorld, and there's a mama shark do. While the performances come across as lighthearted and fun across the board, and that's great, and despite the premise of a shark in a water park being an exciting idea, when half your movie looks unfinished and the other half is just uninteresting, I don't know what there's really left to latch onto. I do like this movie a little more every time I end up watching it, but right now I'm barely hitting neutral when I'm watching Jaws 3D. 1965's Doctor Who: The Crusade. For this watch, I did have access to the telesnaps and the written reconstruction, opposed to having a novel or there being any kind of animated reconstruction, so please be aware. This time around, the TARDIS landed pretty safely, it would appear, without incident, but nobody having learned their lesson, the moment we step outside of the TARDIS, someone gets kidnapped. It's Barbara this time. And thus we have an adventure. This one themed to the Third Crusade. The Doctor and Vicky hanging around with King Richard the Lionheart, while Ian gets knighted and rides off to save Barbara, who is avoiding the machination of the Muslim Sultan Saladin's less than honorable underlings. Mirroring the Doctor and Vicky's adventure, really. Ultimately, this is a story where the protagonists we have been following don't have a whole lot of agency, as the Doctor's plot is just asking the Richard the Lionheart for help. And Barbara's is trying to escape a few times, and once again Ian is the hero and just barely surviving. Although he does absolutely save the day at the end with some last-minute outwitting. As with many classic Doctor Who historicals, this story is rife with brownface, as was common practice with the BBC at the time. It is refreshing that great care is taken to show that the Muslim characters portrayed are generally treated with respect and show just as much compassion and wisdom as King Richard is portrayed with at the very least. If there are characters that are a little more backhanded, it is very clear that there is a counterpart on the other side as well. The Crusade also continues the trend with improved writing in the series, famously creating the cadence of Shakespeare's prose for much of the story's dialogue to great effect. Across the board, the serial specifically has excellent production value as well. The sets and action sequences are on par with the improved writing. It really is sad half of this story is lost to time. 2014's Justice League War. I would welcome the argument that this is the best Justice League movie. After a rewatch, it is certainly my favorite of the ones that have come thus far. This is an origin story for the titular Justice League. An army of flying outer space demons is terrorizing the world, I think, but we are only focused on the few coastal cities of the United States our heroes are clustered around. Watching them fight parademons, gradually moving towards a center point until everyone meets and bickers before punching the bad guys together. This is a story we've seen before in the comics, and we will see again in live action. You get most of your classic Justice League lineup here. You get Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, The Flash, and Green Lantern. Cyborg takes the Martian Manhunter's classic place in the team, which works with the story presented as it reflects how the Justice League has evolved since its inception, and is definitely accurate to the source material that this book is specifically referencing. And Shazam takes Aquaman's place here for reasons I cannot fathom, and I love Shazam, and I love him in the League. He's very significant in his own right, but he is very superfluous in this story. This story also smartly takes Superman off the table pretty early, as well as Batman, by having him be the one chase after the Man of Steel. It lets everyone else shine while Batman and Superman get their own moments and their B-plot. If I had to complain, it would be a little bit about the character writing. It's feeling a little forced and off-character. There is enough space left over in the runtime to really flesh out the heroes that we love, even if the movie uses the time it had magnificently, pairing heroes that can play off each other while the gang, gets together. 1965's Doctor Who: The Space Museum. What happened after the Crusades? Who cares? Half of those episodes were scrubbed and we just woke up in a friggin' space museum without explanation. The Doctor and his friends are kind of stuck out of phase for an episode, seeing the future where they're captured but unable to interact with anything for time travel reasons I really couldn't explain. Then things turn into a more traditional, if smartly written, cat and mouse story for 3 episodes between the museum guards and our crew, plus a few rebels, because what is Doctor Who without rebels? Here's another serial where the Doctor gets sidelined pretty early on, captured pretty early on, and strapped to a chair while everyone else runs around. I've noticed a slight trend the last few serials where it feels like Ian is also being dumbed down, while at the same time being given even more action to partake in. Barbara gets a bit more to do than normal, and Vicky also gets a lot more to do because Vicky primarily works as the go-between between everyone else and the rebels when they finally become relevant. It is really exciting we get to play around with some sort of time travel concept in the first episode, even if it makes 0 sense whatsoever. It feels like there has been a bunch more attention given to the writing throughout the season 2, but the Space Museum has some particularly fun moments. You can really see the series evolving into what it's going to become gradually with the Doctor himself. 1987's Jaws, The Revenge. Ah, yes! The Jaws movie where the shark has roars right out of a Tom and Jerry cartoon. Here we continue to follow the Brody family, the mother more specifically this time around, in their continual battle with the ocean's second deadliest predator. After the family's younger son, who we've seen 3 times now, gets got, the family matriarch has a pretty natural breakdown and spends the holidays with their elder son in the Bahamas, where no shark would ever follow. The shark follows. Jaws, The Revenge, almost wants to be a meditation on grief and loss, as well as paranoia and phobias in general, but the shark. Everything with the shark. The one thing that this series requires kind of makes that impossible. Not only does it just not make sense in the Bahamas, or for it to have any sort of a grudge against the Brody family, but giving it some sort of psychic connection with Mama Brody makes those previously mentioned themes impossible to take seriously. But as much as this movie is universally reviled, I do have a small spot for it. It was the first Jaws movie I ever viewed, having watched it late night on TV. Not so much a soft spot that I think it's a quality production, but I've always liked it a little more than Jaws 3D. 1956. Godzilla, King of the Monsters. Did you know that Terry O'Morse was chosen to direct Raymond Burr's scenes because they thought since he was an experienced editor, he would be better at figuring out what would be needed to edit around the original cut, which he cut a lot out of to squeeze Raymond Burr in wherever they had enough footage to shove him. So our new point of view character can watch the movie's real protagonists deal with a 400-foot tall radioactive unit that is Godzilla, from just off to the side where he can talk about it to the audience. I think this is actually the first time I've ever actually watched the Americanized adaptation of the Japanese classics, and since the DVD I first got to watch Godzilla on featured both versions, I normally just have a tendency to lean towards that original language production. This adaptation should absolutely be praised for the things it does well. Raymond Burr has always treated the franchise with dignity and respect, and O'Morse did an excellent job slotting Burr into the movie in a believable way. But it still cannot be perfect. Once someone notices this guy is just 2 feet to the left of all the important characters talking, it is impossible not to see the seams. That mixed with losing so many of the powerful themes and messaging in the editing process definitely has me leaning towards the original version still. Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. Can you believe this is the 27th on-screen adventure of our titular Indiana Jones? And we still don't know how he lost his eye.
Sadly, though, the Kaiser got wind of what the Emperor was up to. He called the kid in on the carpet, gave him a real dressing down.
This time when we catch up with him, he's a sad, angry, broken old man who's forced on an adventure when Nazis show up to steal the MacGuffin he stole from the stealers of the MacGuffin back during the Second World War. This time around, Indy is joined by the morally compromised daughter of an old friend that Disney really wanted to pass the franchise off to, as well as her plucky young kid sidekick. Disney also threw a whole bunch of money into digitally de-aging actors, and it looks fine, but Harrison Ford still sounds like he's 90? But that is pretty much only relevant in the opening sequence. Throughout, Ford brings as much energy as he possibly can at 81 and being Harrison Ford. While everyone else is, at the very least, matching his enthusiasm, Mads Mikkelsen especially does well in his villain routine. Making the titular dial the MacGuffin does irk me because we know what the dial did. We've known about it for a while, and it wasn't anything mystical whatsoever. but that feels more like a nitpick to me, because overall my biggest problems with the movie is it feels really bloated. Like, and stop me if you've heard this one before, that too many little things had to be added to appease the studio. To its credit, Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny does feel like an Indiana Jones movie. If you told me Spielberg directed this, I would probably believe you. And despite all of its shortcomings, I do thoroughly enjoy this production more than I do not. But I do also have a lot of love for the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles, so I'm probably a little biased. 2023's Black Demon. In this Megalodon-sized Sharksploitation feature, we follow a family on vacation. Well, the dad is here to investigate an oil rig and brought his family along because he thought it'd be a nice vacay. Well, it ain't. Not only are the local residents pretty hostile for a variety of reasons, but there is a big old shark swimming around that rig, like a big old chonky boy. Oh, and there's a bomb strapped to the rig that everyone is way too casual about. There are good things here, particularly everything with the tourist destination before everyone is forced onto the oil rig. The shark scenes, you know, the scenes you are probably here for, are also more well done than they are not. Plus, there's a couple of side characters who really steal the show by just being good, chill dudes. This is not a particularly graphic horror movie, but Sharksploitation movies rarely are. For the most part, this production is also shot pretty adequately, except for when you get to any kind of sequence with exposition, it's just kind of all over the place. Coupled with one of the most unlikable horror movie husbands, it leaves you with a big old uneven shark movie that does have a little bit of a bite. 2023's The Pimevals. Here is a movie that took 60 years to make on and off. Originally greenlit in the 60s and shot in the 90s, and finished by the director's friends long after his passing. Pimevals' protagonists are a group of researchers scouring the mountains of the Far East hunting for yetis, only to find a valley untouched by man, but full of lizard people and proto-people. So, you know, adventure ensues. Do you love stop motion, but Mad Gone and the self-referential stop motion were a little too fucked? Here's something way more akin to the classic Harryhausen stories, for much like those earlier movies, this is a deliberately slow-paced adventure through the mountains until we get to the outstanding but expensive and time-consuming stop-motion effects work. The Pimevals is not some sort of lost masterpiece that's been rediscovered. It's a fun, low-budget adventure movie with some wonky acting decisions steeped in late 80s and early 90s filmmaking stylings. It was a passion project made by a dead artist's friends, and the studio even admitted that the project isn't going to make a profit and don't expect to recoup their losses. Everything about this movie is special in its own right, and I think deserves to be celebrated. YouTube's The Drawk Show. The Drawk Show might not look it by its profile pic or sound it by its name, but they have been releasing one of the most in-depth and equally lighthearted critical analyses of the storytelling giant that is One Piece. The core of their One Piece videos is Drawk, who has been a fan of the series since childhood, re-experiencing it alongside his mother, who's reading it for the first time. And she has the best eye for subtext and cultural analysis I can absolutely fathom, being an English teacher by trade. The pair do an amazing job recontextualizing the story of One Piece arc by arc, having a candid discussion while Drawk makes beautiful One Piece inspired art in the background. Not once have the two been demeaning towards any part of the fandom, or in general being kind and supportive of one another in the audience. Relating back how One Piece is a big, exciting, fun action adventure and has real-world themes of racism and abuse and cultural elitism. I know they stream on Twitch, but I keep up with them here on the YouTubes, where they just finished covering One Piece's big Dressrosa arc. A link to their channel will most certainly be in the description for y'all to follow. Yeah. That's it. Thank y'all for, sitting with me talking about what we watched last week. What did you watch last week? Did you watch anything particularly special? And y'all are kind and patient and the best. I know this video went up a little later as I've been traveling for family over the weekend. This is also going to be a pretty busy week coming up, but I don't foresee another delay when getting the video up next week. Again, if I've mentioned any YouTube channels, they will absolutely be linked in the description, but I think I'm gonna call it and get the frig out of here. And I don't know if anybody has told you this yet today, but thank you for making it through the day, and thank you for being good people. What we watched the second week of Luke. So, still recording. Camera didn't go down. But full of proto people and lizard people.